So, what is influence? What does it really mean? It's such a complex concept and it has so many different aspects to it. So, just to identify what it means, is the ability for us to use what I have identified as 6 critical areas that lead to successful outcomes. And what I want to do is to invite you to give us your thoughts. What do you think these things mean? Because we just have a little concept here, but let's expand it together. Give us 6 elements that you see here are context. And the brief definition of context is accurate situational assessment. So what does that mean, and why would it be so important in terms of preparing for an interaction where you want to influence the outcome or you want to influence a decision maker or a group of people? Why would understanding the context be so critical?
And at this point, I'd love to give an example of a concern a client was sharing with me about their frustrations around influence, and context was the exact source of the problems. They were trying to influence in the wrong space. There was a meeting about a completely different topic, and my client was trying to influence on something else. And so the focus of their boss was trying to resolve the meeting, whereas the client was trying to push a different agenda. And so the context was really not the appropriate one for that influencing situation.
So when we miss the context and we're actually starting with a disconnect, and it's as if we're talking about something, a reality that is not shared by the person receiving our message. Any other thoughts or comments on context?
I think there's a question there about how do you understand the context, so to get a better understanding of what the context is about.
That's a great point. So when we're looking at context, we're looking at what is the situation I'm walking into? What has just happened? And the context is not only the practical situation of, where are we? What is the setting we're sitting in? But what events occurred just before? What events will occur after? And how are the two going to impact the interaction? If you're talking to someone who has just been told they're not getting a bonus and the whole organization is in turmoil, you are walking into a very hostile situation. So you need to literally feel the temperature of that situation before you walk into it. And so context is really critical. Understand what's going on, what are you walking into. The second area that's really important in influence is relationship. Understanding the power status, who's who, and who has the power to do what, and what is your relationship to that person in terms of how you're perceived and how you perceive them. So that power relationship can include status, and it can include a power distance, and the kind of fear that people may have in cultures where power distance is great. Is it a relationship where it's informal? Are people open to listening to you? Do you feel safe in that space? So understanding who you're dealing with, who are the players in the situation, the relative power of each, and what are the preferences of those stakeholders? Do they want you to speak in a very respectful, formal way? Do you need to send them an email before? What needs to happen before you initiate that interaction?
The Center for Creative Leadership talks about influence as being created in 3 specific ways. One is by authority, the second is by expertise, and then the third is by relationship. So often, if we know that there are people in an organization that we will need to influence in the future, it's worth building some relationship capital with them, worth cultivating a better relationship with people so that we're not just showing up on their doorstep trying to influence without having put anything into that relationship bank account in advance.
There's a bit around there with the relationship around trust, isn't there? How do you build trust with people? especially people that, as you point out, Kat, that you may not have a lot of interaction with, who you maybe only talk online. So how do you build trust? Because people are only likely to be influenced by you if they trust you. So one of the things you need to consider is, how do you build up relationship trust?
And that trust is a two-way street where your consistency and congruence in your own behavior can inspire trust and distrust. So it works both ways. Trust is a two-way street where your consistency and congruence in your own behavior can inspire trust and distrust. So it works both ways. So yes, that is an invisible fabric that we don't necessarily take into account.
And I think there's a little bit about the cross-cultural piece there for people to consider as well. We've got a wide variety of people on the call from different regions of the world. And so how we think about appropriate behavior is going to vary from the culture to culture that we come. So what I might expect from someone being from the UK might be wildly different from someone who may be coming from China, Korea, any of the other different regions of the world that we might have on this call today. How do you build trust in cultures that aren't similar to yours?
And those two are foundational, to really think about. People sometimes underestimate the need for strategy and strategizing before we enter into any kind of transaction where we want to influence people, or a relationship where we want to influence people. And that brings me to the third point.
Can I just say, just before we start, there's just one other thing, is that it could sound like we're sounding a little bit Machiavellian about strategy, about how you need to influence, but it's not actually.
Yes.
It's more about understanding the other person and what they need. So you can think about it from a very empathetic point of view rather than strategizing. It's actually thinking of putting yourself in the other person's shoes, so they understand, so you understand what they need, and therefore what are you trying to influence them about? Is it something they actually need, which relationships you're trying to form? And of course, the bit that you're about to get onto, Faye, I know.
Yes, and a great point to clarify that strategy is not necessarily something evil. Strategy is a plan. Is a plan. It answers to the question, how do I do it? Literally, it's as simple as that. And people make strategy something way out of proportion, and that brings us to the purpose.
I wanted to add one more thing about that
ahead.
strategy, because you make a great point, Stephen. When I do speak to coachees, they often are concerned with it sounding, like they have ulterior motives, but often we are trying to influence within the organization towards a common organizational goal. And what we're trying to do is help our leaders or our peers see our perspective in service of the organization. And so it's not really Machiavellian, as you said. It's just a way of helping other people to also share our perspectives and see where we're coming from and take on board our ideas.
Yes. Definitely. And a great point to clarify that strategy is not necessarily something evil. Strategy is a plan. Is a plan. It answers to the question, how do I do it? Literally, it's as simple as that. And people make strategy something way out of proportion, and that brings us to the purpose.
I wanted to add one more thing about that strategy, because you make a great point, Stephen. When I do speak to coachees, they often are concerned with it sounding, like they have ulterior motives, but often we are trying to influence within the organization towards a common organizational goal. And what we're trying to do is help our leaders or our peers see our perspective in service of the organization. And so it's not really Machiavellian, as you said. It's just a way of helping other people to also share our perspectives and see where we're coming from and take on board our ideas.
Yes. Now, once we have that clear understanding, the next challenge is to answer the question, why? Why are we approaching this person? Why are we getting into this situation? And one of the things I strongly believe in is that clear communication is the function of clear thinking. So clarity. Why am I speaking to this person? Why am I having this conversation? And what is the result I want? And I don't see any other way to have an effective interaction with another person, especially if we want to influence them. People are busy. They don't have time to give us 110% of their attention. In fact, we get a very small fraction of that. So when we come in with a clear purpose and we say the reason I want to talk to you is, and we come up straightforward and transparently with it, I think is an excellent starting point. Or
so it's a really tricky situation, especially they have obligations to the organization. Like Faye said, we're trying to get people to serve the organization, and that means at times that leaders won't always reveal everything that they perhaps know, and that comes out later in the conversation or later in the program, events or project that they're involved in, and that's where distrust comes from at times, because they're not able, the leader isn't able to reveal all the knowledge that they have at a particular time because of the impact that may have at that particular moment. So I think it's absolutely, I support both what you and Kay are saying about, it's about repeat, keep those communication lines, explaining the reason why distrust might have broken down. But I think there's a piece there about accepting that actually it's not always possible to be transparent because of conflicts of interest, all sorts of reasons that go on in organizations.
And I think one way to handle that is to say, I can't share everything with you about why we're doing things this way or making this decision, but what are your concerns so that I can make sure to keep those in mind as we move forward, is a way to make sure people are feeling heard, even though they can't be privy to all of the information.
I think that's absolutely right, Kay. It's acknowledging the fact that there are things going on that you will not, that is being authentic still, even though you're not actually revealing all the carry.
Yeah. Number 4 is interaction and the transaction. An interaction and a transaction are a little bit different. I would differentiate them by saying an interaction is something where it's more based on relationship, and the exchange is about, creating personal rapport and influencing each other because we want to get some kind of understanding. But a transaction is far more related to a more practical request, maybe a process that needs to be understood and carried forward. We need things signed. One is more technical and one is more relational. But in either case, we need to have effective communication and negotiation skills and to know how to deploy and use them with the person that we're dealing with. And Number 5 is, what is the outcome we desire? When we look at this, we're having a conversation, we're consuming time, energy, effort, and resources. What do we want? What is the result that we want to achieve? And we identify that so we can say, if I have succeeded at this relationship or in this conversation, what is it that I want to see happen? Do I want to get someone to say yes? Do I want them to sign a paper? Do I want them to approve a budget? Exactly what is it that I'm looking for? And how will that indicate that we have succeeded? Now, I'm going to merge 5 and 6 because they're related. What 6 says is, okay, you got approval, but did you get application? It's not enough to get approval. We must have a follow through, which means the desired result was put into effect. By when, by whom, and how can I look forward to that? So that you have some people who are very creative and enthusiastic and full of energy, and they get these ideas and they're just bursting to share them. And they share the idea. And even though the idea might be really great, they haven't fully thought it through before they speak out. So what's the reaction? What do you think is the receiver's perception when this happens? Even if the idea is theoretically very good.
So to answer this is something that I used to be guilty of a lot, where because I'm creative, I would just come up with an idea and not get the data to back up my idea or to make a solid enough business case. And so often it's like people got used to me just sharing ideas rather than making a concrete case for something.
Yeah. Superficial and hasty is the conclusion that a receiver may come to. It's not necessary, it's not truth. It's about, how people interpret that behavior. So let's silent out of fear, this not wanting to be insulted, not wanting to receive a rejection, not wanting to be put down in front of other people, because one of our greatest fears is rejection. So what impression does this give?
So this one is where we take a notch away from our ability to influence by always being silent. And I think this one is intelligent people who are worried about being judged are often guilty of, because they're not adding to the conversation. They're not sharing perspectives that might go against the grain or create dissent. And they diminish their ability to influence by not sharing their expertise and their knowledge.
Weak or nothing to say. Which is not true. And I really want to emphasize the word perception. It's not. Number 3 is not making a business case to support your ask. You want to ask, but you don't make a business case. Now, why would this be important for the organization? How would it improve the bottom line? How would it make relationships better? What contribution is it going to make to the business or to the group? And absolutely. Yes.
What may seem obvious to us in making our case is not always obvious to the receiver. They need data. Some people need facts. They need to understand the ultimate logic behind it and the outcome.
And we always need to say what this means is and interpret it, assuming that others know or have time to see what we are doing. One of the biggest issues I face when I'm coaching people on influencing is that I don't want to toot my own horn. I shouldn't be advertising. I don't want to be boasting. I don't want to be showing off. People, we need to recognize that people don't have time to go and look over our shoulder and see what we're doing. And in fact, they're wrapped up in achieving their own goals. So they really don't know what we're doing. And it's just like the news. If it's not reported, it didn't happen. So what's not seen or heard simply isn't happening. And we need to bear that in mind. So we need to find professional ways that we're comfortable with and that are okay with our personality and our values to show what we're doing in an appropriate way to the right people. So, yeah, number 5.
A narrow personal focus versus an understanding of strategy and business priorities.
Mm-hmm. Go with that one.
What are your thoughts on this, Stephen?
In terms of how that's received, I think there's another part to that with personal focus, is that you're not thinking about the other person. So it's not just about understanding the strategy and business priority. You're not thinking about the other person's needs. And so therefore, I mean, one of the things there you said is about naive and to take seriously. The person just might dismiss you because you're just not thinking about their needs. So they're not thinking you're taking into account what they require. So you
Exactly.
have to, it's a point I raised earlier, you have to be able to influence and walk in the other person's shoes, to understand their needs and position yourself from that perspective.
And speak to them through their frame of reality, through their understanding of what is priority and what matters.
And this might sometimes require a little bit, an intermediate step before you go ahead to influencing, a little bit of research, maybe talking to other stakeholders and running your ideas past them to see if they are broad enough or well thought out enough before you pitch the ultimate receiver.
Yep. Being judgmental, blaming others, and taking things personally. This can put you in a very, very disadvantageous place, because you come out, this is really a whining position and a complainer who sees that everybody else except them is responsible. And that certainly won't earn you any credit, either in a corporate world or even in a family context or in any kind of a business or serious situation. Petty, immature, you're not able to see beyond yourself. A complainer who only reports problems. So often managers say, don't come to me with a problem, come to me with at least 3 solutions. Please give me some options so I can discuss it with you. Don't just come with a problem.
Yeah, and the collateral damage of this is that if you do eventually show up with a solution, people aren't listening because they've already dismissed you as somebody who just shows up with problems.
So, I mean, we'd love to hear some comments from some of you. Are these legitimate reasons? Are these reasons why we give away our power to influence when we don't, think about, when we talked about strategy earlier, thinking about what it is that you want to accomplish and how to accomplish it and how you should show up to have the impact you want. So, number 8, not using the appropriate communication style for the receiver. Everybody has a preferred way of being communicated with. Some people like to get an email in advance so they can reflect on it before they have a conversation with you. Some people like to have an agenda for the meeting and a very structured session. So
a written case, documentation,
exactly,
charts.
And some people like a very friendly conversation. Some people want you to start out by asking them about their family and their health, and other people are irritated if you do that. So that's something we need to
and there are cultural norms about this as well. So what's expected in the US about how you walk into an meeting and start pitching yourself against how you might do it in the US, very different. Very different between the UK and Germany. I remember facilitating a meeting between heads of department between T-Mobile and half the telephone communication company is based in Germany and the other half's based in the UK. And just the cultural differences, it was really difficult to get people to listen because of the norms that were prevalent at both sides of the table.
Yes. People will shut down and say, this will apply in that country, but not here. It doesn't work for us. And unless you translate it to their language, it's ineffective. Number 9, not aligning expectations with the receiver. What exactly are we trying to do? What exactly are we trying to accomplish? What are your expectations? What are my expectations? How do we align these so we're not mismatching the purpose? And the outcome of that is people would see you as a poor performer. Lots of activity, not necessarily productivity, because productivity is measured by meeting expectations. People measure productivity is that you have delivered what I expect, and therefore you have done a good job. So working hard is not necessarily rewarded, and people get very upset when they say, I've worked so hard, I've put so much effort into this, and it's not appreciated.
So a prime example of this is too much workload, right? So my expectation is that I need to do all the work. My boss's expectation is that I set boundaries and limits to the work I say yes to and the work I say no to. So I'm going to my boss and asking for additional resources, and my boss is expecting me to set boundaries and prioritize my work in a better way.
And number 10, assuming that you can't ask because you don't have formal authority. The most powerful people, the most influential people in organizations are the ones who know to exercise informal leadership. They do the best. The ones who are really great networkers, internal networkers, the people who can influence others. They're likable, they're perceived as congruent, as charismatic, as sincere. They have a huge effect. And so that attitude that you project, you're not just talking to people when you need something from them. You really are talking to them because there is some mutual benefit to both of you, and collaboration is the way you see it happening. And this is more and more critical in organizations with complex matrix structures.
So this is obviously my research area, what I've been doing for the last 20 years, the importance of understanding the emotional context of how we influence. And I think the bottom line is that people make decisions not just on facts and figures, but also on the emotional component of that decision. So in other words, feel emotionally comfortable with whatever you're trying to sell them, pitch them, influence them with. They have to feel emotionally comfortable with it. And so in a nutshell, there's no point in trying to pitch something or influence someone has a different emotional feeling about what you're trying to pitch them. And I'll give you some quick research to back this up. They did some research that looked at people who wanted to feel calm. And what they found was that people who like to feel calm actually are more likely to be calm people. So it's very simple. Likewise, if you're someone who gets very angry, then you're more likely to be influenced by angry people. It's that simple. You know, you have to understand the emotional tone of the person that you're trying to communicate with, and so that's the first sort of message I'd like to get across. The other message is that a lot of people associate influence, and this is what this slide's about our drive to influence others. In other words, that we need to be influential all the time. We need to be standing up, having impact, trying to persuade others. And the problem with that is that if we don't take in the context, everything that we talked about at the first slide, you know, those 6 areas, we don't take that into account when we're trying to influence people. People don't pay attention. They don't take on our ideas. So actually, you could have that strong need to be influential. You could be very confident. You might be very comfortable standing up saying, listen to me. But actually, because you miss out all those other 6 components, you actually don't influence. So you might be seen as someone who could influence, but because you do it inappropriately, you're not taken into the areas that we talked about, you become an ineffective influencer. Whereas someone who perhaps scores at the opposite end of this scale that we're using may be a really good influencer, not because they are happy to stand up and say, listen to me, but because when they do speak, they've thought about the context, they've thought about the relationships, they've thought about their purpose, they've thought about what they want to say, how they're going to measure it, all those things we talked about on the first slide. But they don't do it very often because they don't have a strong to influence. But when they do, they do it appropriately. So what we have here is about what we call business emotional intelligence. So it's about being aware of your emotional drivers, how that affects, and how do we know that affects the work. Apply that to influence. It's about what drives our influence. How do we show the way we influence? How have we thought about all those sort of situations? And then how do we know it's working? You know, that last point that we made on the first slide. And then the bit that everybody misses out on that I'm talking to leaders is about how do you know what you're talking about actually is hitting the right nerve with the people, the group that you're trying to influence. You know, there's no point as a leader standing up and saying, oh, this is the direction this is the vision I have for this company. This is the way we should be going. If it's just not hitting that right emotional sounding board for the people you're trying to influence. So how do you know that you're actually hitting that point? What are you going to see in their behavior? What is going to be different at the end of the day or the end of the week when you've done these great big speeches? How do you know what you've done is actually hit the right mark? And so it's about all those parts that Faye so cleverly outlined right at the beginning, but all the time you're thinking about it from an emotional point of view. So how will it feel for those people if I actually influence them appropriately? How will they feel differently about whatever I'm trying to say? What do I want them to feel like? And how do I know that they're actually feeling that?
We would like to share with everybody a little formula that you think might be useful, and you can actually remember that by using the name Chris, C-R-I-S, to become a more impactful influencer. And it's just C-R-I-S. C stands for clarity. Before you approach any communication, identify exactly what it is that you want and what the person that you're addressing or the group you're addressing may need, and write it down. Because when you write it, you force your mind to really remove the fluff and get to the point. One clear sentence of what it is that you want.
And can I just add to that? Can I just add to that, Faye, and ask them how you want them to feel? It's a really simple question, but how do you want them to feel? Do you want them to go away excited from whatever you're trying to influence? You want them to go away thinking, oh, you know, I'm not sure about that. You want them to muse over it because you're not ready for them to make the decision, but you want to give them lots of facts and figures and things to think about. How do you want them to feel, and what is the outcome you're looking for them?
So that's the first.
People influence on their feelings. As much as we like to think, oh, it should be an objective, it's always that, you know, oh, do I trust this person? What is it that I like about them that makes me feel like I trust them?
Exactly. People will buy from those they like and trust, full stop.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's really important for you to sit down and clarify what is it that you're asking for and why and how.
Yeah.
The second is reporting. Make sure, by reporting, I mean, make sure you're speaking to the person who actually has the power to deliver what you want. If it's sales, you make sure you're talking to the decision maker. If you have a problem, you don't with your husband, you don't talk about it to your neighbor or vice versa. You talk about it to the person who can. So by reporting, I mean, talk to the source, go to the source, talk to the person who actually has the ability to do something to fix the situation. And I stands for involvement. Have an open conversation, because the question that you were raising, Stephen, how do I know? How do I know that I've hit the right chord? Ask open questions to ensure that expectations and understanding of the desired outcome are fully aligned. You know, is this what you had in mind? Are there any things that I have left out? Is there something I can add to make this more appealing? So involve in exchange, in a two-way conversation, to make sure that expectations are genuinely aligned. And S stands for standards. Agree on how success will be measured. How will you know that you have succeeded? So this is a tiny little, you know, like an aid memoir that you can just keep in your pocket to practice over and over again. Have I covered all these bases? Am I talking to the right person? Do I really understand what they want and how I'm going to impact them on not just on a logical level, but on an emotional level to get the result?